Volume up. Hello and welcome to another Monday night Q&A from the NIC, EIC and Alexa. I'm joined tonight by my colleague Mark Barnes-Ryder from the Technical Helpline. Good evening, Mark.
Evening, Sam.
How are you today?
Yeah, not bad. Trying to stay as cool as I can, but as we're on air at the moment, that's proving quite difficult. So, yeah.
Yes, it's been very warm. We shouldn't complain though, because it's been very wet before that, and I suppose I'd rather be warm than wet, as they say. So yeah, it's been good. Anything exciting up to at the moment, electrical wise?
Electrical wise, quite a few questions on ERCRs, as we seem to get. Lots of questions on EV charging. The odd earthing and bonding question. You might find that hard to believe, but no, generally pretty consistent really with all of those, to be honest.
Yeah, it is amazing how wide our industry is, and yet sometimes it seems to be the week for a particular set of questions, and that's all you get for that week, and then the week after it's completely different again. It is strange the way it does seem to ebb and flow on subjects that time, whichever's a popular, a hot subject at the time. So without any further ado, then we'll have a quick look at the question of the week this week that we posted out today on social media, and it was around if I need to add a circuit protective conductor, a CPC, to provide an earth to the exposed conductive part of an accessory, what's the minimum CSA of the CPC? So reading between the lines of the question, we're thinking about perhaps the accessory exists already and just doesn't have a CPC. So this is kind of being done retrofit. It's being done after the accessory's been installed and supplied. So what's your first thoughts? I think this is one of those multi-layered questions when we looked at it. So if I need to add a circuit protective conductor to provide an earth to the exposed conductive part of an accessory, what's the minimum CSA of the CPC? So where are we starting on that one, Mark?
Okay, so I mean, this is assuming that we are running a completely separate conductor, which isn't forming an integral part of a cable, or it's not formed by a conduit, ducting or trunking, and it's not contained in an enclosure formed by a wiring system. So with that, we would go to regulation 543.1.1, and you know, it's pretty clear that well, it is very clear, that reg, but there are, as you said, multi-layers and lots of other things to think about. But taking it at face value, that regulation says that it could be 2.5 mil copper equivalent CSA if protection against mechanical damage is being provided, or 4 mil if you're not providing mechanical protection. Now, if you think in terms of when we used to bond, supplementary bond bathrooms, it kind of follows that route. You know, if you're not protecting your bonding conductor, 2.5 mil. If you 4 mil. If you are protecting it, 2.5 mil. But then we have to think about other things to think about. Sorry, repeating myself there. So you've got two options. You can either calculate using the adiabatic, or you can select from table 54.7. If you're gonna select calculate from the adiabatic, you need to take the most onerous of the fault currents that are likely to be carried by any of those two circuits. If your CPC is going to protect more than one circuit, you'll need to base your adiabatic on the most onerous fault current. So that's that effectively. You can select it from table 54.7, but then you would have to base it on the largest of the line conductors of any of those circuits.
So yeah, if we show the first part of that reg that's relevant, the first part, as you rightly say, tells us if the CPC is effectively a single insulated conductor or maybe a double insulated conductor, but it's not part of a multi-core cable, it's not formed by the containment system, and it's not formed by an enclosure, then we've got those two limits: minimum of 2.5 mil if it has got mechanical protection, so if it were in some form of containment or perhaps protected by a steel plate, 4 mil if it's not, and then, as you quite rightly said, but those are the minimum sizes. We still have to get the size right, don't we? And the size, the same reg actually tells us that we've got two options. We can either size the protective conductor by calculation, so that's using our friend the adiabatic equation, or we can size the protective conductor by selection from table 54.7, which is the table which is done with correlation with the line conductors. So we should really be doing those things first and then checking does it meet the minimum size requirements of 2.5 or 4, whether it's got mechanical protection or not. So size it first, and then, because it's on its own, it's not got any other protection, think about the 2.5 mil and the 4 mil. So I guess they're in there just to ensure that it provides some mechanical strength, the cable itself. Yeah, Mark?
I think I'm inclined to agree, Sam. There is a certain element of, as you say, providing mechanical strength and electrical continuity, isn't there? Similar to any circuit protective conductor when we talk about circuits with high circuit earth leakage currents, the size predominantly is about mechanical strength, as well as fault current capacity.
Yeah. And then there's one last consideration, isn't there? If for whatever reason we were to bury that conductor, then again that puts some enhanced requirements on size. So that throws us to a different reg, an earlier reg, where it talks about minimum cross-sectional areas of buried earth in conductors. So that's table 54.1, and again that's really associated with mechanical strength. For if we're going to bury the cable underground, again it wants a minimum sizing to ensure it's got the mechanical strength to withstand that burying capacity.
Yeah, and don't forget that if you're using anything other than copper, you've got to meet that copper equivalence. You can use steel, you can use other materials, but you've got to meet that copper equivalence. That's what we're always striving for. And
then picking up the buried issue, we quite often get asked, don't we? What depth? At what depth should I bury cables for domestic garden lighting, or in general any really domestic garden installation? So what do we need to bear in mind when we're talking about depth of cables in domestic gardens, Mark?
Well, the likelihood of the ground being sort of disturbed, because our guidance generally says 0.5 metre in the sort of typical garden environment, but if the ground's likely to be disturbed more onerously through different conditions, such as take the example of agriculture, where you might be going deeper with a plough, then you'd have to bury it a bit deeper. If you're looking in at guidance note 1, you'll see there's a table in there by the National Joint Utilities Group. They talk about a minimum of 450 mil depth where you're maybe across a driveway or something like that, and a bit deeper if there's vehicular traffic that can travel on that path, or on that road. So they should be also identified by warning tape when you're burying them. We also recommend that the route of that cable is is documented perhaps in a little drawing or something, and append that to your installation certificate. That's always good. Or even send some photographs to the client. All of that information is really key in ensuring that your end client knows where that cable is, really. And likewise, any other contractors that might be coming along at a later date, or if there's any associated building works going on, all of that information is really key to avoid any sort of unforeseen, consequences, really.
Yeah, because it's one of those ones that there's no actual depth specified in 7671 at all. It just talks about that cables should be at a sufficient depth to avoid damage by any reasonable foreseen disturbances of the ground. So like you said, Mark, it depends on what, if we're talking about a grassed lawn where we wouldn't expect there to be any foreseeable disturbance, that's probably where we can think about our half a metre recommended depth. But if we were into the vegetable side, the flower border, etc., then we might want to think about more. And we suggest warning tape 150 mil above the actual cable, with the idea being that whoever does disturb the ground should come across the warning tape first, to give them some idea of what's underneath.
Yeah, depending on the type of installation, you could even go as far as putting those, concrete coping stones sort of 200 mil above the surface, or no, I think it's probably slightly above the cable, and then you've got your warning tape, as you say, Sam, 150 mil. But either way, the intention is that you either hit something hard before you hit the cable, or you come across the warning tape. That's the general idea.
Okay, we've got some questions now coming into the chat room, so thanks to everybody for that. First one we can pick up on, is it acceptable on alterations or additions to IR live conductors joined to earth only where loads can't be removed and noted on the EIC? So I guess this is a question about being able to limit the live to live insulation resistance test on existing equipment, and just do a live to earth. What's your thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, I think there's an increasing need, isn't there? Certainly BS 7671 makes allowances so you can do that test where there's connected equipment that can't be easily disconnected, and increasingly with the amount of electronic chargers and such like that are in properties these days, you can join the live and neutral together, keeping the CPC in at the earthing terminal or the earthing bar, and doing a lower voltage IR test. But you're still looking for that 1 megohm value, but you're declaring on the certificate now, or the report, the actual voltage that you're applying, aren't you? And we do say where you can't disconnect electronic equipment, but in the case of sort of ring final circuits, for example, where you've got USB chargers, a lot of the manufacturers will state that they should be removed prior to testing. So that's one electronic component that I can categorically say they should be disconnected regardless if you're going to do any IR testing, because it'll invalidate any warranties that might be outstanding on those pieces of equipment, and also they're very expensive to replace. So
yeah, so it's a very good point that that's one of those sections on the schedule of test results which is often missed off, where it says equipment vulnerable to test, and that gives you your part of the certificate where you can record these issues. So you're making it clear to your customers, to your clients, that it's not that you don't want to, it's just that you could actually cause harm to the products. And also under certain circumstances, so if we're talking about an existing installation, the actual disconnection to enable you to do the ER tests and then the reconnection could introduce further faults. So there is a mindset that says that's one of the reasons why we shouldn't do it if we don't have to, And generally, and it is a big word, I know, generally, if you did have an IR fault on the line to neutral, so if for example, if we did have a dead short, then that would be showing itself by you'd be getting your protective device tripping in those instances. So the fact that everything's operating as normal kind of gives you an indication of line to neutral conditions. But yeah, it's perfectly acceptable to limitation that out on an existing installation and just do your live to earth, which is more safety related rather than functional.
Yeah, and it's just another example of where it's important to get those operational limitations recorded, or even, go and another example to say, well, you really want to be going around and doing your initial checks, because then you can relay that back to your customer, and they may well say, well, okay, spend extra time and you can go around disconnecting them, but forewarned is forearmed, as they say.
Yeah, no, definitely, because I think the classic was the high bay warehouse, which wasn't advertised as a high bay warehouse. It was just a small industrial unit. And can you do it really quickly? And we'd be really grateful if you could come around and do it tomorrow. And you've never seen the installation before, and then when you walk in, you see that there's lighting, 40 foot in the air, and there's no way to get to it. So yeah, that initial walk round pays dividends in the long run, definitely. And then, as you say, then you can have your agreed limitations with your customer, because you're making it clear then what's not practical to do. Okay, if we take a look, second one that's in the chat room is, hey guys, when testing a circuit protected by a 30 milliamp RCD used for additional protection, what value is recorded on the schedule of test results ×1 ×5? So this is back to our old friend about one of the changes in the 18th was we actually reduced the number of columns for RCD testing from 2 down to 1. That was to provide us some additional space for some of the new things such as AFDD requirements. So very common question, which should they be recording if it is, as the question identifies, if the RCD's for additional protection, which test results is it that we should be recording, Mark?
So that will be the 5 times test, and you're looking for a disconnection time within 40 milliseconds to meet the requirement for additional protection. It does say that in the regs, actually, that if you can disconnect within 40 milliseconds, you're deemed to meet the requirement for additional protection. Yeah. So it's that instance is if the RCD is there for additional protection, then definitely the ×5, because you'll be evidencing your fault protection perhaps through your ZS readings for your fuse or your breaker. I know the question didn't ask it, but what about those instances, for example, in a TT installation where the RCD might be doing both? It might be doing fault protection due to the high ZE of the earth electrode, but it's also there for additional protection as a requirement for things like socket circuits. So when the RCD is actually doing both, what are our thoughts, or what's the guidance we give then on the single column, Mark? Well, the most onerous condition would be for the RCD to protect, to give you fault protection. So additional protection is an enhanced protection, but you need basic insulation of live parts, and you need fault protection through either ADS or other protective measures. So in that instance, it would be your 1 times test. And generally, I know we always use that word generally. If you can meet your requirements for additional protection, by default you'll meet your fault protection requirements generally. But it will be the 1 times in accordance with table 41.1 of BS 7671 to make sure you can meet your disconnection times.
And what you can do is, if you also want to evidence on your schedule of test results page that you're also meeting additional, you could record that in the comments box on the end, just to make it nice and clear. You will of course have hopefully ticked the additional protection box on the schedule of inspections, but it's not a bad idea to also record it in the comments box with the time, so that when we do our next periodic, we've got something to compare against, because it's always valuable to be able to do that. Okay, next one coming up in the chat room is on an EICR, bathroom lighting circuit is not RCD protected and there's no supplementary bonding. Is it still a C2 if light is batten lamp holder? Well, I think we'll forget about the batten lamp holder for a minute. So no RCD protection for the circuit serving the bathroom and no supplementary bonding. The only thing I would say is just be very careful, because this one, our guidance is adequate supplementary bonding. So if no supplementary bonding is required, for example because there aren't any simultaneously accessible extraneous or exposed conductive parts, then no supplementary bonding is adequate. So first of all, you've got to determine, risk assessment wise, is supplementary bonding required, and then if we take the question, so no RCD and inadequate supplementary bonding, what would be our thoughts there, Mark?
So no RCD and inadequate supplementary bonding would be as far as our best practice guide goes, is a C2.
Yeah.
It's highly recommended for C2. But as you quite rightly say, Sam, it's the inspector's job to determine actually whether supplementary bonding is actually required, because you might get off lightly there if you can confirm that it's not actually required.
Yeah. And then record against your C3 for recommendation of of additional protection. Record because it's due to risk assessment judgment that there's no supplementary bonding required. So again, do that definition, document it, so that you're making it clear to the next person. I think the issue. So the question was a valid question, but the light being a lamp batten didn't really affect it. I would question the lamp batten separately in terms of, is that suitable for a bathroom environment, and that would be very much based on where it is within the bathroom and what the ventilation is within the bathroom. So have we got the potential for water pooling and condensation and moisture, because generally a batten lamp holder won't be the right IP rating for within the zones of a bathroom. So that might actually introduce a second question. So again, that would be something I'd be looking at, safely isolating and then open that fitting up to see if there were any signs of moisture or water ingress. Would you add anything to that, Mark?
He pretty much covered it, I think. Even quite right. Open up the fitting, check for any signs of moisture, and even the batten holders with the home office skirt that are meant to be a bit more protective. I mean, at the end of the day, it's got to have a sufficient IP rating if it's particularly in zones 1 or 2. If it's outside of those zones, it just needs to be suitable for the environment, which basically still needs to have an adequate IP rating. So because you then revert back to sections 1 to 6 of the regs, 512.2.1, equipment suitable for its environment. So yeah,
absolutely. And it's all, I think it's one of those easy ones to fall into. Just because you're outside of the zones perhaps means you don't need to comply with the enhanced requirements of section 701, but you've still got parts 1 to 6 to comply with it. And as you rightly say, part 5 tells us that everything we install should be suitable for the environment we're installing it in, or the way that we install it makes it suitable. So yeah, we've always got to consider environmental conditions even when we're outside of the prescribed zones of a special location. see where we are next to. So plastic incomer for water, gas is copper. Did an R2 to water and MET disconnected and tested that 7.7 kiloohms reading. Do I bond or not bond, as could the reading be through the gas pipe work? Yeah, it's a very good question and well put. So in these instances where we've got plastic incoming for water, but then possibly I'm sensing that the water does change to copper within the property perhaps, but it's not extraneous. The water's not extraneous because it's got a plastic incoming service. However, the gas is copper, and therefore I'm sort of reading between the lines that is extraneous, and because of that we might have a lot of metal to metal contact, for example where the water service pipework enters the boiler and the boiler's connected to the CPC. So, you know, in order to prove that it is truly reading 7.7, we've got to be able to disconnect those, which can be difficult. But yeah, you could remove the, you know, safely isolate again, and then remove the CPC from the boiler. You perhaps consider removing the gas pipe bond from the MET, so that you are truly measuring the water pipe without it having any sort of supplementary connection or any simultaneous paths created by the installation. But a difficult one to prove, and you've got to really consider those other alternative paths.
Yeah, I mean, where you've got a plastic incomer, technically there's no requirement, is there, to bond? That's what the regs say. And even if you've got a plastic insert close to where the pipework enters the building, there's no requirement. Sam's quite right. You will pick up continuity through fortuitous connection of all of that pipework. I mean, with combi boilers, they've all got a common manifold where all your pipes come in, so they're all going to be connected there. As a minimum. But just remember, plastic pipes in general don't need to be bonded. I think that was the gist of the question, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you that's our general stance, that if it's an incoming plastic pipe, it shouldn't need to be bonded. But if it's one of those ones where you can't see, it might dive under the ground somewhere in the house, so you're trying to ascertain whether it is truly extraneous or not, just bear in mind all those parallel paths that it can pick up a CPC from, especially if it's the water pipe and we've got a gas boiler or even electric boiler, but we've got connection to that boiler which has got a CPC, and in the case of gas, where the gas is then bonded, so we have got some continuity then between the gas pipe work, the exposed conductive parts of the boiler and the water service pipe. So you've got to be able to remove the continuity of those, which is possible, but you just need to think about how you're best going to do it. Okay, we've got one sort of a follow-on from the garden lighting. Back to garden lighting, I've sometimes SWA cable just lying on the surface above the soil, partly covered in leaves and branches, etc. Would this warrant a code on an EICR? I guess my thoughts would be, if it's not adequately supported, so if you're putting stress and strain on the cable or its connections, or it could result in that, because if someone could snag it while walking in that area, for example, and pull it, then I think we'd certainly be looking at a C3. And likewise, if there were any signs of damage, if it is on the ground, people are dropping objects onto it, maybe even you've got animals and plants having an effect on it where it is. So again, I'd want to visually inspect it for signs of mechanical damage, and even if there were none, if there were no signs of stress on the cable, I would still suggest looking at C3, and it could be improved. It could be properly supported because BS 7671 tells us that it should be throughout its length to avoid the possibility of stress on the cable or its connections. Yeah, I think it's a common one, would you say, Mark? But yeah, one that we would definitely take a sort of second look at.
Yeah, definitely a common one. And as you say, I think I'd be the same as you. I would visually inspect it first, because laying on the ground at the back of a fence, it may not necessarily be dangerous, but if there's excessive amounts, it could present a trip hazard even. So, you might recommend a C3 on or a general. If it's a trip hazard and everything, and you were happy with everything else, you could record it as a general comment. But yeah, initially I'd be looking for making sure that it's terminated correctly, so it provides mechanical strength. If it's laying on the ground, then it's still worth a comment, because as you say, it might be able to be clipped up a little bit higher off the ground. But I think my visual inspection would tell me a lot in that instance, where it's laying on the ground, and particularly where it's rooted.
Okay. Another one. There's a few people talking about, I think, agreeing in general with the possibility of parallel paths and connection with our water pipe and our domestic. So a newer question is there a certificate for installing an SPD or a certificate of conformity? There isn't a specific certificate associated with it. If we're actually installing an overcurrent protective device for it, then you would consider that a circuit, a new protective device, and it would warrant being recorded on an installation certificate. If it's something that's added on its own to an existing, it's possible that it could be catered for through a minor works certificate for an additional alteration. I do remember, if I remember, there were some comments on the document for public comment about adding some further information to installation certificates regarding SPDs, in particular, so that it was clear where the locations were. But we've still got to wait for the output of that DPC as to whether, if at all, those recommendations will be included in future certificates. But there isn't a specific SPD certificate. It's just covered by the standard certification of either an EIC or a minor works. So again, we're cracking through the time. I'm always amazed at how quickly the time goes. One from another common one. So when carrying out electrical work on an installation forming part of a TNCS system, is it necessary to upgrade existing 6mm protective equipotential bonding conductors to 10mm? So the question is it necessary? Do we have to upgrade, Mark, on an existing installation?
No, not necessarily. I mean, as we often say, you're looking to see how the existing bonding conductor is connected. Are there any signs of thermal damage? Has it got the right clamp for the environment connecting that conductor? Because if it's connected outside into a gas meter cabinet or something, it might need to be a different, more suitable clamp. But providing you can tick all of those boxes, you could just make a comment if you're on the condition report, and even on an installation, you would make comments against the existing installation in that box to say that you checked all of that, and it doesn't require replacing, or it's you could always recommend when it's convenient, perhaps. I mean, if the property's going to go through a future sort of refurbishment, then might be a good time to do it. Sometimes it depends how difficult it is. I mean, I've been on jobs previously where I've changed the fuse board and the bonding's been so short that I've done it there and then, and it's taken me sort of an extra 15 minutes. So it does depend on those factors.
And one other I'd add is that if your work involves additions, So now you might be thinking, okay, well, if there are circulating neutral currents in the bonding, then they might increase due to my additions. So again, then it might be worth doing some investigation to it. So signs of thermal damage, perhaps consider putting a clamp meter on the bonding conductors to see if they are permanently or commonly carrying circulating currents. But yeah, if there's no signs, then there's no requirement to upgrade. But again, document it. We're a terrible bunch in terms of the way that we treat each other sometimes. So, and it'd be one of those classics. If you didn't document on the condition report that you had seen that they were 6, and you did everything reasonably practical to confirm that they were still adequate, and that's why you left them at 6. If you didn't do any of that, then I can guarantee you the next person that came along is going, oh, who did that last one? That Sam bloke, he never checks the bonding. So it's really good advice to use that box which says comments on existing installation to make it clear the 6 mils were already there. They're not something you've installed, so you can't be accused of incorrectly sizing the bonding conductors. You're making it clear that they were already there, and you're also making it clear that you've done everything reasonably practical to confirm that they're adequate for continued use. So yeah, really important to fill that box in.
And we can't stress enough, guys, that your description of the work carried out, if you've done lots of small jobs, then detail it on your installation certificate, because all of that information is key. And likewise with your EICRs and your observation codes, make sure you write enough down to back up the C2 that you're offering, that you're recording against that particular observation. It is so important, and we're all guilty of perhaps not writing enough at times. So
it's so important, Mark, because I can tell you this is the absolute truth. Working a retrofit before, and afterwards, luckily we had documented things well, but afterwards we were actually accused of changing windows and doors, which was being done at the same time as we were there. But we were brought back to site for this shoddy work that was done, and of course we wanted to attend site quickly to see, we were pretty sure we hadn't done any shoddy work, but yeah, we were accused of fitting windows and doors, just because we happened to be on site at the same time as that work was being done. So yeah, be very detailed. It's always a good idea to detail exactly what you have done, and often exclude things that you haven't done, particularly because they were already there, so that at a later date you can't be accused of having done something that you haven't.
Yeah, I think now would be, I know time's marching on, but I think now would be a good time to sort of just remind everybody that, if you're registered with us, then in particular we'd like to see you using, relying on best practice guide number 4, because it's got some really good examples. Like all of these guides, they're not exhaustive, but they'll give you a very good idea of some of the common observations. That's for domestic and similar. That can be applied to your commercial environments as well. So please follow that guide, because you can avoid a lot of aggravation from clients in the future. Obviously open to people that want to become registered with us. Please download that guide. Best Practice Guide 7, Pocket Guide 17 as well. They provide lots of useful information on condition reporting. So it's all free, and it's put together by people in the industry. So please use it. We can't stress enough, really.
Yeah. Okay, we'll have to call a halt to it there tonight. I can see that there are a few questions have come in at the end. I can guarantee we will pick those up, and we'll start with those next time round, because there were some follow-ons from the talk about the garden. I just wanted to make people aware that we have got another episode. Or another edition of our wire webinars this Wednesday of this week. The subject this week is the 10 most common mistakes on certificate and reports. That's a two-parter. This is part 1 of 2. That'll be starting at 8 p.m. on Wednesday the 16th of June. So if you haven't already registered for that, please go to the NICIC website and register for that presentation. And lastly, as Mark mentioned, you know, we always strongly recommend Best Practice Guide 4 for all of our coding issues. And if you look at the slide that we've popped up now, you'll see that that's just one in a great range of 9 freely available best practice guides that you can download from Electrical Safety First website, covering all sorts of subjects, from changing a consumer unit to safe isolation, to fire alarms and systems. So yeah, really good set of documentation which is freely downloadable from the Electrical Safety First website.
And if you do want to spend a little bit of money with us, then Inspection and Testing Book has also got some examples of classification codes for condition reporting as well. So that's the inspection testing certification, including periodic reporting, 8th edition. Contact the sales team for that if you'd like to, as I say, for further examples.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I know it's a really hot night again, and there's football on the telly, so I'm sure there's lots of other things grabbing for your attention. So thank you very much for those people that did join in tonight. Thanks very much for posting the questions. Apologies if we didn't get round to your one, but we'll certainly pick up on some of those garden questions again for next time, and hopefully see you next Monday. Have a look at the webinar on Wednesday, and as I say, if you've not already registered, there are still some slots available. Please go in and register for that for this Wednesday night. So goodbye from me. Thanks very much, Mark. Another good night.
Thanks, Sam. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Okay, and hopefully we'll see you again next Monday. Thanks very much.